We'll get started. So hi everyone. I'm not sure if my face pops up. I'm having computer issues, so it might just be my phone. Thanks for joining us for our second NGRIP training and Q&A session. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing for folks that can't make it today. We have many opportunities to ask questions, and we're a pretty small group, so you can probably just turn on your microphone and ask questions as they come up, or feel free to put them in the chat. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve Riley, the Assistant Coordinator for the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture and the Coordinator for NGRIP.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. So I see we've got 5 folks on at this point in time. We may pick up some others, but yeah, I'd love it if you guys are in a position to turn your cameras on so I can at least pretend like we're in the same room. But I would also just say that as Krista mentioned, we just want to keep this pretty informal, and feel free to stop us as we're going if you need to, but we will take some deliberate breaks I'll offer up a PowerPoint, and there's several breaks where I've set up so that we can visit a little bit about this. I guess the first thing I want to know is, did any of you sit through this before, or is this all a new group?
I was on it the last time you had it, Steve.
I was as well.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out how much we need to talk about what we talked about before. Were any of you kind of in the other category that just need to have kind of a primer of what NGRIP is about?
I was on the last one too. So.
Okay, all right.
So Steve, I wouldn't mind going back over some of that again, just so that I make sure that I am clear on everything.
Okay, we'll just try to run through it, and again, I'll probably go through it a little more quickly. It looks like we picked up a few more folks now too, and we'll assume that there's at least somebody on there that hasn't seen any of this, and it'll be a refresher for others. But I'll probably go through it fairly quickly so we can spend more time talking about it and answering questions. And if we don't have any, then we can get back to our days. I'm in Nebraska today, having to do this, but I guess it doesn't matter where you are with Zoom. But Krista tells me it's nice in South Dakota today, so we'll let you get back to the nice South Dakota weather if we get done quick. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So again, if you've got questions, feel free to just take your unmute yourself and jump in. All right. Oh, I think I forgot to go back to the beginning of this thing. There we go. Hope that didn't make anybody seasick. So the NGRIP program, is our I guess to start with, for those of you who kind of joined late, I'm Steve Riley, Assistant Coordinator for the Northern Great Plains Joint Venture, and Krista Erdman is our Science Integration Specialist, and she is specifically working in South Dakota under an agreement with NRCS. So I give you the information here so you can get a hold of us. Should have all this, at least our email addresses, in the email that Tate sent out. So for those of you who don't know what a joint venture is, I'm guessing that many of you do, but we're a voluntary partnership of landowners and industry and government, both state and federal, as well as nonprofits, tribes, academia. You can see the page here that shows all of our the folks who are represented on our management board to help to govern particularly management efforts that we work on. You can see the map basically in South Dakota. It's not basically, it is all of West River. So that's where we work, and we really, are very well suited to work with partners, and we're really working with our partners together to build and sustain healthy ecosystems for birds and other wildlife and people as well. Really kind of our catchphrase lately has been resilient grasslands. And of course, one of the things that is really important to the habitat joint ventures is bird habitat. So real briefly, we have a conservation delivery program that we call NGRIP, Northern Grassland Restoration Incentive Program. And I'm going to go through some of the details throughout this presentation. Talk a little bit about what the NGRIP program is. And I'm going to be for NGRIP, I'll be a primary contact. But if you want to talk to Krista locally, have her come out and visit, I'm sure will be happy to do that. We also have kind of a structure for vetting projects, and Tate Lands, for one, is on what we call our local leadership team. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this is basically just another financial assistance program meant to be on working lands and really focused on grassland bird habitat, which of course we have healthy grassland systems, pretty good for a lot of other things, including ranching. So the program's available throughout the joint venture. We're hoping that it can be strategic, particularly focused on where some of the declining bird species are going to benefit from it. Want it to be predictable. If you put a project in, it's a good project, it gets funded if we still have money. And we want it to be universal in the sense that any conservation practitioner who's working with a private landowner that qualifies and is eligible for what we'll talk about should be able to deliver a project. And we talk about the program as being our program. We mean all of our partners. So if you pick up the mantle and decide to be a project manager, as we call it, and work with a producer to do something, then it's your program too. We hope that this has reduced administration for the project manager, more time for project, less time doing paperwork. It's not paperwork free, nothing is, but hopefully it's real predictable. If you've got a good project, what'll fit in and get funded. We have right now we're using three different funding sources. We can take on as many as we can find, so that helps too. We can, if we have funding that comes in, for instance, from a local PF chapter or something like that, and they want it spent in their county, we could do that. And we could focus projects, and then the chapter doesn't have to worry about managing a project or keeping track of paperwork. And we really designed this, as you'll see, around NRCS framework largely. We use NRCS conservation practices, and we have a payment schedule that is based largely, it's not exactly, but because especially since we have 4 states we're working in, based off the practice cost sheet. And we've done it this way so that we can encourage all of our partners to use it, and hopefully help our non-NRCS partners learn a little bit more about how NRCS, particularly EQIP, works. And it also creates a bridge for the RCPP program. And this program was born out of a similar program in Texas and Oklahoma, which had a big RCPP funding component. And again, just can't emphasize more, it's for working lands. Just a little bit of a sense of the birds that we are trying to manage for. The ones in bold are our highest priority species, but the rest of these are on the list of birds that the joint venture and all its partners have identified as being very important priorities throughout the joint venture. And you can see some of them are fairly common species that we want to keep common, and some of them are more rare that we'd like to make sure we can have more of and maybe stop the bleeding. So the N-GRIP process, just as a bit of a primer of how this works, a practitioner will fill out a proposal with the producer, and that proposal is essentially a kind of tells what we're planning to do, which practices, and it expresses how much those are expected to cost, and it has maps in it, a lot like an NRCS project. It also has a fairly simple conservation planning page that really essentially says, here's what the conditions are right now, and click a few buttons, add a few comments to let us know how those things are going to change in the future. Things like what the plant materials are right now, what you expect the change to be. Maybe you're going to replant an old field back to native grassland, and we'd be able to say that right now it's smooth brome, and you know, we expect that down the road it's going to be a higher diversity mix of native prairie grasses. Maybe it's not currently in grazing, but maybe it's a CRP program acreage that's coming out, and we're going to switch it from being in CRP to back to grazing land. And so maybe we're going to put some fence in, maybe we're going to put water developments in, something like that. And to the degree that it makes sense to talk about the grazing system and how that may change, those things are all going to be helpful for you to catalog with the landowner what the expectations are, and then for the review team to have a little bit more information about what to expect. So from there, we have the local leadership team that's made up basically of managers and supervisors in each state. Each state has a different local leadership team, and these are people who are like Tate, either manage a bunch of people or programs or both. Basically, they're shot callers already, and we want them to be involved with this so we can have everybody kind of on the same page about what kind of projects we're doing and why we think they're important or maybe not important. So once they go through that, if it's approved, it's going to then we'll assign the funding to it from one or more of our funding sources. And you don't have to worry about that. We'll just figure out where we've got money that'll pay for it. And then we'll come back and I'll prepare an agreement with you in the loop, but we'll send that agreement electronically to the producer, who can fill that out online with their phone if they want to. That seems to be what people prefer. It's just an Adobe form, and they can sign off on it right there. We'll get it signed off on by our funding partner, which in South Dakota will be Ducks Unlimited. That'll be the agreement is really between the joint venture and the landowner, but we have a funding partner because joint ventures, for the most part, don't actually hold their own money. They rely on partners to do that. And in our case, it's Ducks Unlimited. So won't get into too much more detail there unless you have questions. But once we execute the agreement, then you'll be able to work with the producer to get that project implemented. So that's really our process. And this is just more of that. Funding partners basically hold the agreement and write checks on our behalf. And in South Dakota, it's just Ducks Unlimited. North Dakota, we have the North Dakota Natural Resources Trust involved. And right now we've got somewhere in the neighborhood of about $450,000 that we're trying to put on the ground. So I'm going to stop at this point. One of our planned kind of breaks here for questions and answers about that part of it. sometimes people have asked about a little bit more detail about agreements and that sort of thing. So whatever comes to mind, this is a time to maybe ask some questions. Krista, can you think of anything that needs to be added at this juncture?
Maybe just to highlight what the turnaround time could be between submitting your proposal and getting it approved to get projects on the ground.
Great, that's a good point. So generally speaking, we'll kind of follow a NRCS approach of having a what you might call a batching period, where we'll be open for business at any point in time. Anyone can put a proposal together, but we're not going to just, for the most part, we're not going to assemble the local leadership team just whenever anyone comes in. So we'll probably, be every 2 or 3 months. Might be longer than that if we don't get any. Might be quicker than that if we have some projects with a particularly short fuse. And we did, just as an example, in North Dakota, we had one right after we kicked the program off that someone had some land that they were putting into CRP, but they had some tracts that didn't qualify because they didn't meet the cropping history, but they wanted to go ahead and enroll, wanted to plant it back to grass anyway. So we were able to go in with them and provide the grass and forb seed. And we were able to turn that around from the time the project came in till the time the landowner got approval. We were able to turn that around in about a week. So if there is if you had something like, another example might be a prescribed fire. Sometimes people don't think about it until the last, until it's kind of, we better be on this right now, or we have to wait till next year kind of thing. And we've done it before when I was in Texas, where we've expedited things that couldn't be expected to go through the RCPP process. We found some other cash funding to pay for things like fire breaks right out of the chute. So we were able to turn that around and allow them to get the fire breaks in when it was time to get that done. So anyway, just examples. Any questions? Comments? All right, I'm gonna keep charging forward. So when it comes to the proposal, it's kind of for those of you who work in the field with the producers, it's going to be the part that is really important for you to be able to handle and understand. We basically, as I mentioned, we've got, I'll show what the proposal looks like in a second, but essentially our proposal becomes an addendum to the agreement. So everything we put in this proposal will be a part of the project going forward in much the same way as the NRCS would keep everything in the folder. We don't lose anything, but we try to keep as much much of the landowner's decisions, particularly and responsibilities right up front. So if that proposal goes through the process, it will become, we'll attach a couple page agreement to it, and it will all serve as part of the same agreement. And it also, as I mentioned before, has elements of the plan built into it and maps and that sort of thing. The proposal, though, is not, at that stage, is not an agreement. It's kind of the project manager and the landowner getting together saying this is what we'd like to do, and we hope that the joint venture has resources to fund that kind of a project. So the project proposal starts out with kind of the vitals. Who's doing it, where are they doing it, and what are they doing? We have again this kind of a plan that's real simple. Vegetation and vegetation use plan. I'll show you that. I will say that, like all of these kind of forms, they tend to look intimidating when you start. I wouldn't be intimidated about this. Once you get into it, I think it is a lot easier than what it maybe looks at at the beginning. But and then there's also a page that is a fillable form that you basically select the practices and add how many acres or linear feet or whatever unit is in there, and I'll show you that as well. So you're basically selecting the practices that you're already familiar with at NRCS. We've kind of cherry picked the ones that we want to work with, and you can use those. We do have a few of them. Most of them, once you put the acres in, you're gonna pull the costs off of the cost list, and it's gonna populate that for you. But there are a few of them that are kind of wild cards for some of the things that are maybe a little bit newer, and we don't have a practice for them described. We don't have practice costs that maybe fit real easily. And I'll show you that here pretty quick. So the project proposal, on the front page, again, you're looking at details about the land and the producer, and if they have a manager other than the producer themselves, keeping that in there. A little bit about where the land is, including the lat lawn. And we want to know a little bit more about, just a few details about the land. And then, right away, you're down to talking about the what the conditions are out there right now, which you're going to need anyway, and what kind of treatment we think will address that. And then the second part is, what's the proposed, what are the proposed treatments that we're going to use, what practices, and talk about that. Left you a little extra space in the third one in case there wasn't enough in either of those other two to capture what you want to say about the project. And, I would say in these, the thing to know here is that we're not looking for, an essay. We want, just the facts. What's needed, why, and what are you planning on doing? And we can get to more details about that a little bit further down the road. So this page on the left is this vegetation status and conservation plan, and you'll notice that most of this is just little things you click on. As an example, the first thing on the list is, what's out there right now. Is it native or non-native plant materials? And of course, if it's a crop field, it's pretty much non-native. And you just click on that and what you expect that to be down the road. And we've just, for simplicity, since these are 10-year agreements, we've just said, what do you think it's going to be in 5 years? That'll give us a window for, hopefully, for anything that we plant to be growing and thriving at that point in time. So, and if we've got to install a grazing system that's different, that we have time for that to really take hold. So what's happened 5 years? What do you expect in 5 years? And then we kind of talk about what plants are out there. We've left room for most of the common things. You can just click on those. Most of these are just asking for the dominant species and what percent that makes up. So it's real easy stuff that you guys do all the time. Some of these are not going to have any. If you're looking in some areas where you're just in the prairie, you're not going to have any trees. And then we have a little bit about the grazing system. What's it look like? Click on the box most appropriate, and then tell us what it is right now by clicking on current and what's planned to be in the future. If you know the stocking rate, now some of these things you're not going to know. If you don't know, don't worry about it. If you're dealing with a producer that doesn't like talking about their stocking rates, or maybe doesn't have a good handle on that themselves, that's just what it is. And then we do want, this is kind of the more challenging part, is we want you to talk about those 5 species of birds, which ones you think should be there, or which ones should be there after it's treated. And we have some tools on our website to take a look at those. And so you can see where the breeding range is. That's pretty much what we're looking at, is that if we have, if your project occurs in their breeding range and it's grassland habitat, pretty good chance they're there. If it's not grassland habitat now, but you're going to make it grassland habitat, and they're in their range, you're probably going to get some things there. We also left this big blank spot for all those other 21 species. So you may have wild turkey on there or sharp-tailed grouse, and you may want to make a pitch that this is really a good site because we have a couple of sharp-tailed leks on the area or near the area, and we think maybe we'll get a new lek or we'll get some reproduction from those leks on this site. So we're trying to tie this back specifically to this very important, at least from a joint venture standpoint, resource concern, which is these birds that we're trying to, and the reason, just to put a little bit of sense to that, the reason this matters is because the NIFWIP grants that we have and the other funding that we have all tie back to these species. So the funders essentially want us to tell them how we're doing with these species. And hopefully, since some of these critters are important to NRCS as well, it'll help you in some ways. We do have a little piece in here if you happen to be in a situation where you're going to have prescribed fire. We have some of that. And we also talk a little bit about trying to set up a time down line to revisit things with the producer so that there's have that conversation up front. And that's kind of, that's our little quick and dirty plan tool. I don't know if it's wonderful, but it's a starting point. Then we have the next page is basically a bunch of pull down menus for the different practices that you might be using. And then being able to punch in the unit costs and the units, and we have this list. We have a corresponding list with what we pay for each of the units, and it'll just populate itself. And at the end of this, you're going to have a total. And we have you can see that some of these at the bottom of the list. We have other. We have actually 3 different ones for other, and if you look at the list, there's, if you actually pull up a copy of this, and I encourage you to do that, you can click on that and it lists some of those practices that you're going to probably need to make a proposal for. So it might be, somebody's got I don't know, maybe they want to put some nest boxes, and we don't have necessarily something specific for that, and they could propose how they're going to do that, why that's important. So that's kind of the way this works. We ask for a producer signature on that, just so that you've taken it to the point where they say, yeah, this is kind of what I want to propose that we do. And this is the practice payment list. Again, there's we've got most of these are pretty familiar. The payment rates, since we have differences among the 4 states rather than having 4 different ones, I just went in and tried to use those rates. Some cases, because things are more expensive than when those were put together, we grabbed a higher rate. And in some cases, there was a pretty good average that we were able to take, but I actually have a justification sheet. So if I have an auditor come back to me and say, why'd you use that number? I can show them how I got the number. But it follows the same kind of approach that NRCS does, that unless it's one of these other features, we're probably not going to need to have an invoice. We're just going to be paying them for doing the work. So that's kind of the project proposal. Like I say, I'm sure there are ways we can make this better and easier, but I've tried really hard to make it pretty turnkey ready so that you can do most of this on the computer. When you get in there, there's actually a couple of spaces for you to upload a map. So if you do a map and save it as a JPEG, all you have to do is click on the button. It'll ask you to locate the file. You click on the file, it puts it in the document. That's all there is to it. Questions, comments, thoughts? Any observations, Krista?
I was just going to say, is there a landowner contribution that's expected?
We do have a form for trying to capture the landowners' contributions. We built this with our NIPWIP grant so that we're kind of making the same kind of assumptions that NRCS is, that the landowner built into these costs is making a contribution. So we're trying to capture that with a form that will be associated with this. But we also know that sometimes the producer is doing some other things that we can capture as match. So we're trying to catch those as well. And that'll give us on the overall grant, a little bit more freeboard for meeting our landowner or our non-federal contribution. So, we'll be able to do some of that. We also have some of the funds that we got from a partner to pay for seed. So for landowners doing restoration work where they're getting a seed mixture, we can pay up to $100 an acre for seed mixture. So and we can also use we can help do the paper site prep with the traditional N-GRIP. So it's possible that a producer can can really keep their costs low on doing reseeding, and we're all about keeping grass green side up, or putting land that probably shouldn't be farmed back into grass and keeping it that way. So if we're willing to pay a little bit more for that. Cool. One more chance. Anybody have any questions? Great. So just kind of going through again the process. You develop that project, goes to the local leadership team. The review will either we're either going to say, no, that really doesn't meet muster, and hopefully we'll have had an opportunity to talk so that doesn't happen. We'll have and maybe in some cases it'll be sent back that we like it, but there's a part that needs to be addressed or fixed, or we may just love it and approve that. And once it's approved, it's going to go to again, I'm going to prepare a contract, assign the funding for it, and we'll move forward. In some cases, and you guys know this, but if we're doing something like that's soil disturbing, like putting a pipeline in, we may need to have some compliance documentation. So that could obviously hold things up. You guys are in a position where you can probably expedite that. A lot of the other partners can't, but we do have to, with the particularly NIPWIP funding, because it has its origins, some of it in Fish and Wildlife Service funds. We have to follow their rules, and they have some pretty stringent compliance things we have to deal with, of course, with NEPA and SHPO. And as soon as we get through those two things, we have a signed contract, and if there are compliance documents, we have those all in hand, then I'm going to turn you loose to go back to the producer and ask them to commence work. And that's really how that works up until the time we do a project checkout. If you go to our website, which is just ngpjv.org, we have a page called Resources. We have another page that deals just with N-GRIP, and you can get to the resources page from there. But on the resources page, there's a section on N-GRIP that you can go in and download all of the different forms, and there's a document that should help to guide you through step by step as well on the proposal. And Krista put that website in the chat. So that's now we're down to the end of it all, and any questions that you have. I think that when Tate I'm not sure who all is on at this point in time, but I know in talking with Tate about this, he saw this as an opportunity, perhaps to take some of the projects you've been working on with producers in equip or CSP or whatever that didn't get funded, that maybe elements of it would fit this and could get the producer at least part of their project done. So we thought it was worth giving it another go with folks to see if there's anything out there that you want to try to put forward. I'm going to stop sharing, and we can just visit if there's any questions or comments, or if you feel like you getting a handle on this and think there's something that your colleagues would benefit from hearing from you, that's fine too.
So Steve, just one kind of general question that I have. What are your thoughts as far as like kind of a size limit or anything like that to these kind of proposals? I know that there's not unlimited funding there. So do you have any guidance or recommendations there?
Yeah, we don't have a hard, fast rule on that. I typically would say we probably don't want to go over 50 grand or something like that, but it kind of depends. If we had a really rock star project that cost $60,000 and we're restoring a bunch of prairie or something, I think we want to look at it. So we don't really have that. I will say that water projects can get really expensive really quickly, and I think that the downside of a water project is that the cost benefit ratio that we're going to look at is going to get top heavy real quick if that's all you're doing. And so you're probably going to have a hard time justifying in a lot of cases that's going to make a lot of new birds and bird habitat. But you might be able to. Water may be in some properties it may be the thing that you really need to be able to get it under control, particularly if you've had something that's been long-term overgrazing, and by putting in a different system, maybe we can make a difference there. So good question though. Other questions, comments? Does anybody have a practical kind of an example of something that they're looking at that they want to talk through? Because I don't have one on hand, and that usually helps to make things a little more clear if we're talking about something practical. Well, not hearing anything. I don't want to keep you away from a beautiful day in South Dakota. I will say that do take a look at the website. Do take a look at the proposal and some of the other documents there. I'm happy to answer any questions individually if you want to give me a call. I'm sure Chris is as well. And if we can do anything to help walk through I know the first time doing something like this is a little intimidating, and we're here to help so that we can take the edge off of that. All right. Well, I think that with that, we probably don't want to beat a dead horse. Just let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks for putting this on again, Steve.
You betcha.